Joe Bonamassa. Even the name can split the blues world right down the middle. Yes, he's sold millions of records and fills arenas across the globe. But behind those vintage Gibson Les Pauls and towering Marshall stacks lies a path of bruised egos, rivalries, and long-simmering resentments that most casual fans never hear about. The blues circuit is smaller than you might imagine, and when egos this large collide, the sparks and the grudges are unforgettable. We're talking backstage showdowns, social media jabs, and decades-long disputes over authenticity, respect, and who really carries the torch for the blues. Some clashes began with something as petty as an argument over guitar tone. Others erupted into full-scale industry feuds about what the blues is supposed to represent. Tonight, we're shining a spotlight on 6 guitarists who ended up on Joe Bonamassa's bad side. And trust me, that's not a place any musician wants to be. These aren't bar band weekend warriors. These are Grammy winners, Blues Hall of Famers, and players whose fingerprints are all over the genre long before Joe ever picked up his first 6 string. Number 6, Kenny Wayne Shepherd. This is the feud that started it all. And when you look at the circumstances, it almost makes sense. Both Kenny Wayne Shepherd and Joe Bonamassa burst onto the scene in the 90s as teenage blues prodigies. Both favored vintage guitars, both mixed classic rock into their blues roots, and both were fighting for the same fans, the same festival slots, and the same record label attention. Insiders say things boiled over at the 2003 Blues Music Awards when Joe reportedly made a few sharp remarks about Kenny's manufactured blues background, questioning whether someone who grew up in Louisiana comfort could truly understand the hardship that shaped authentic blues. Kenny, never known for backing down, allegedly snapped back with digs about Joe's so-called trust fund. Blues accusing him of buying his way into vintage guitar collections that other players had spent a lifetime chasing. The tension reached a flashpoint at a major Chicago blues festival. According to witnesses, Joe's crew moved Kenny's prized vintage Marshall stack without permission, triggering a backstage confrontation that required security to separate them. One onlooker described it as 2 spoiled kids fighting over the same toy, but beneath the insult was very real rivalry. Their careers mirrored each other in almost every way. Both had famous mentors, both obsessed over rare gear, and both faced constant criticism from blues purists, questioning their authenticity. Instead of bonding over those shared experiences, they became reflections of everything they disliked about each other. Number 5, Derek Trucks. This one cuts deep because Derek Trucks represents everything Joe Bonamassa has always wanted to be: universally respected, critically adored, and fully embraced by blues purists. While Joe was busy collecting expensive vintage instruments, Derek was earning his reputation the old-fashioned way, sitting in with legendary players while still a child. Prodigy, their tension reportedly began during a tribute album session in the early 2000s. Studio engineers recall Derek nailing his parts in 1 or 2 takes with his signature slide guitar, while Joe needed multiple sessions and heavy overdubs to get his sound right. To make matters worse, Derek casually remarked that he didn't need rare gear to capture authentic blues tone, a pointed comment given Joe's obsession with equipment. The rivalry intensified during a backstage run-in at the New Orleans Jazz Festival. Joe approached Derek about a possible collaboration, only to be politely but firmly turned down. Derek allegedly told him their musical philosophies were fundamentally incompatible, suggesting Joe should focus on feeling the music instead of collecting. Industry veterans say the real thorn was Derek's deep connection to the Allman Brothers lineage, especially through his marriage to Susan Tedeschi and his work with the Derek Trucks Band. Despite all of Joe's success, he could never break into that inner circle of Southern blues royalty, and Derek's effortless credibility served as a constant reminder. Number 4, Gary Clark Jr. If Derek Trucks represents the acceptance Joe craved, Gary Clark Jr. represents his worst nightmare, the next generation taking the crown. When Gary exploded onto the scene in the 2010s, he brought something Joe could never manufacture: street level authenticity and crossover appeal that felt completely natural. Tension began when Gary started landing the festival headlining spots Joe believed he'd earned through years of relentless touring. Joe was said to be especially bitter about Gary's Grammy nominations, privately dismissing them as more about politics than real musical merit. Those comments soon made their way back to Gary's camp, setting the stage for a long, cold rivalry. Things came to a head during a shared guitar clinic. Gary showed up late, strolled onto the stage halfway through Joe's demonstration, and reportedly told the audience, "Let me show you how this is really done." He then delivered a masterclass in soulful, effortless blues guitar that made Joe's precision look clinical by comparison. Joe, visibly upset, left the stage citing technical problems. Behind the scenes, promoters say Joe tried to use his influence to keep Gary off high-profile gigs, sometimes making his own availability conditional on Gary not being on the same bill. At one charity event, Joe allegedly refused to perform simply because Gary's name appeared higher on the poster. Number 3, Warren Haynes. Warren Haynes has something Joe Bonamassa can't buy: decades of unshakable credibility and the admiration of his peers. From the Allman Brothers Band to Gov't Mule, Warren earned his stripes through organic, hard-won relationships and music that feels lived in. Their feud reportedly ignited during negotiations for a major blues festival. Warren's management requested a clause limiting Joe's use of certain vintage amps because they were too close to Warren's signature sound. Joe's camp countered with demands to shorten Warren's set so Joe could use a larger stage production. The talks became so contentious that organizers were forced to choose between them and ultimately went with Warren's proven draw. The bad blood deepened during a blues compilation session where Joe allegedly laid down rhythm tracks for a song Warren was supposed to lead. Engineers later confirmed Joe had specifically asked to record first to set the tone. Warren called it one of the most disrespectful studio experiences of his career. The final insult came when Joe publicly questioned Gov't Mule's commercial appeal, suggesting that Warren's artistic integrity was just a cover for not being able to sell tickets. Warren fired back in a magazine interview, dismissing Joe as a guy who collects vintage guitars but hasn't lived vintage experiences. Number 2, Robben Ford. This rivalry strikes at the core difference between raw blues fire and refined jazz sophistication. Robben Ford has the kind of musical pedigree Joe Bonamassa has always admired and envied. With decades of session work for legends like George Harrison, Joni Mitchell, and Miles Davis, Robben earned a level of respect money can't buy. Their tension began at a masterclass event. Robben focused on theory, harmony, and playing for the song, while Joe emphasized gear, tone chasing, and technical flash. When a student asked about their different approaches, Robben reportedly replied that some players focus on gear because they haven't developed their ears, a comment that clearly struck home. Things escalated during a high-profile recording session where both were featured soloists. Robben delivered a tasteful, melodic solo in 2 takes, while Joe spent hours layering overdubs trying to match the maturity of Robben's phrasing. The producer ultimately chose Robben's track for the final mix, prompting Joe to storm out and accuse the team of bias against successful blues players. Joe later tried to block Robben from several tribute projects, arguing that his jazz leanings didn't belong in pure blues settings, a claim that rang hollow to musicians who knew Robben's blues credentials stretched back decades. Number 1, Eric Johnson. Eric Johnson is the guitarist Joe Bonamassa admires the most and fears the most. While Joe built his reputation on rare guitars and thundering Marshall stacks, Eric reached near-mythic status through an almost supernatural pursuit of perfect tone, a sound so pure that no amount of money could replicate it. Their rivalry reportedly began when both were using the same rare vintage Stratocaster model. In an interview, Eric casually remarked that he could achieve his tone with any decent guitar, adding that some players need specific vintage pieces because they haven't developed their own voice. Joe's camp took it as a direct jab, sparking years of quiet but intense competition. The showdown reached legendary status at a major guitar expo, Eric performed first, delivering flawless runs and crystalline tones that left the audience spellbound. Joe followed with gear worth more than most homes, but the contrast was brutal. One attendee described it as watching someone try to buy their way into genius. Videos of the back-to-back performances spread online, making the comparison impossible to ignore. Industry insiders say Joe became obsessed with replicating Eric's setup, spending hundreds of thousands trying to reverse engineer the Austin sound. When Eric heard about this, he reportedly shrugged and said Joe was missing the point. Tone comes from within, not from a catalog.
Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon.